All right, last week we spent most of our time in chapter 1 of Joshua, and we were looking at the commission that God gave to him. And basically the admonition where we spent most of our time was for Joshua to be strong and courageous. And we said, that makes a very good class title, and so that's why we used it. But we said that there were some differences in the way that we look at it and the way that it's used in Joshua chapter 1. When we look at the admonition to be strong and courageous, especially in regards to a military book like Joshua and one that details the conquest of a land, what we think of is outward. We think of something that's external. Be strong and courageous in the face of enemies. But what we looked at and what we found when we delved into what was actually said in Joshua was that it's much more of an internal admonition. And so we see in chapter 1 and verse 7, be strong and courageous, be careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. In Joshua chapter 1 verse 8, meditate on the law. Be strong and courageous to meditate on the law, that you be careful to do according to all that is written in it. And then verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so we said that really what Joshua is being admonished to do, and what through the analogy that we've kind of developed, what we're being admonished to do is to be strong and courageous, not externally, but been looking at ourselves and examining ourselves, because that's where we get into problems. The enemy is not necessarily without us. God tells Joshua, look, I've taken care of the enemy. What's external has been taken. I've given you the land. We know how that's going to end. What you need to do is be careful about yourself. And what you need to do is concentrate on you. And so that admonition, I think, carries forward to us today. The one thing we did not get to was sort of the end of the chapter where Joshua, there's a section that before the story continues, Joshua speaks to the tribes and tells them one other thing, as we see the external and the external that we talked about. But look down at chapter 1 and verse 13. It says, let's go back to previous page, chapter 1, verse 12. And to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. Your wives and your little ones and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and sisters, and shall help them until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you, and they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it, the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. And they answered and said, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. And so there's one other thing that Joshua kind of tells the people, and I think it kind of fits into this idea of being strong and courageous. And he's kind of stressing the importance of unity. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. We're going to it touches on some things that we'll see in chapter 2. So that's sort of why we're going back and picking it up. But the 2.5 tribes that Joshua is speaking to were given land on the east side of the Jordan. And Joshua is telling them, as Moses told them before, look, when everybody goes over into the land of Canaan, the deal was you come too. And so I think, he's saying, look, we're all one people here. And we'll see some problems with this later on in the book. It's not always as easy as it may sound. And I think we see that even today. We stress unity. Jesus wants his followers to be unified. We talk about being of one mind, one toward another, and having the same heart and the same mind and the same goals. Is that always easy? It's not, is it? A lot of times it's very difficult. And again, it kind of plays back to the idea of being strong and courageous internally, with an inward focus, to maintain that unity. And so Joshua kind of lays out to the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh, look, this land over here is yours, but you've got to come over and you've got to fight with your brothers to take the rest of the land. And so that kind of leads us to the idea of, or the sort of excursion side trip that I want to take, of what happened on the east side of the Jordan. And so we see the here at Kadesh, when the spies were sent and the children of Israel were then defeated, and they came out in this area and began to wander for 40 years as their punishment. But sort of towards the end of Moses' life, as the years went on, they started making their way up to the north along this area of the King's Highway through Moab and up around Ammon. And so, as this other map shows a little bit more clearly, as they came around the eastern side of the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea, there was a couple of conquests that were made over in this Transjordan region, the side of the eastern side of the Jordan. And when we look at the Old Testament, and it's probably one of those things that we really don't think about that much. You know, we're familiar with, when we think about the conquest of the land, what do we think about? When we think about Jericho, we think about Ai, we think about, you know, the Gibeonites and all those things. We don't really think about what happened on the east side of the Jordan. And I'd never given it much thought, and Clay Morris taught a class on Deuteronomy. When was that? Clay, where are you? You're somewhere. No, you're not. Okay. Well, anyway, if he was here, he would, I'm giving him a shout out. Tim, be sure and tell Clay I'd talked him up. He did a very good class on Deuteronomy. But it seemed like over and over in Deuteronomy, these battles on the east side of the Jordan were mentioned, that with Og and with Sihon. And when you get over into the Psalms, multiple Psalms mention these two kings and the conquest there. And so it apparently was a pretty big deal. And it was something that will come up later in chapter 2. And so I want to just look at it for just a couple of minutes. Sihon, king of the Amorites. If you'll turn back to Numbers, the 21st chapter, we read about these two battles. And as get back here to my map. There we go. This area right in through here is where we're looking at right now, the southern area of the Transjordan region. And so Sihon, king of the Amorites, in Numbers 21, verse 21 down through 32, then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, "Let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into field or vineyard. We will not drink water of a well. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. He gathered all his people together, went out against Israel, and came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. And he was defeated, and the city of Heshbon was burned. And so we see that Moses tried to make peace with him. Moses proposed, you know, let us pass through your land. We're not going to, we'll pay you for our supplies, as we see, that's mentioned in Deuteronomy, the passage. He said, we're not going to drink of the water from the well. We just want to pass through. And Sihon would not do that. And so he was defeated. So the cities were devoted to destruction. They left no survivors. They kept the livestock as spoil, and so they took that land. And then Og, king of Bashan, and we're not going to take time to scroll back all the way up to the map, but further north on that map, Og, king of Bashan, kind of the same way. He came out to meet Israel for battle at a place called Edrei in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 1 through 11, we read about Moses recounting this incident. And so it says, "And Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us. But the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon. And so our Lord gave into our hand Og also, the king of Bashan, and all his people. And we struck him down until he had no survivor left. And we took all his cities at that time." Verse 4, "There was not a city that we did not take from them, 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og, in Bashan." And so the Israelites took possession of this entire eastern side of the Jordan River, defeated them utterly and completely, took spoil and devoted them to destruction, left no survivors. It's interesting. The Bible will occasionally throw in kind of an odd little bit of a historical tidbit. And that's the case here in Deuteronomy 3, verse 11. It says, "For only Og, the king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit." His bed was made of iron. It was 13 by 6, if I did my math correctly. And it was so unique, it's almost like he's saying it's in a museum. It's in the Israelite Smithsonian. It is, it's something that is preserved even till this day. Now, exactly what Rephaim are, there's references to them. They were, it appears, some sort of group of people that were kind of like Yogi Bear, smarter than the average bear. Well, they were bigger than the average bear. They were giants, and we read about Goliath, who was probably one of the last of that line. But Og, the king of Bashan, was of that line, and I wish I could tell you more about them, but I wish I knew more about them. But it's an interesting little thing that the scriptures put in. But whatever the case, this was apparently, even though it's kind of overlooked by us in our studies sometimes, it was a major victory for the Israelites, and we'll see that more as we get into chapter 2. And so Og, king of Bashan, was defeated in battle of Edrei, where they took the 60 cities. And I need to remember to advance my slides so that I'm not playing catch up, and then we'll be where we need to be. This area over here, the tribes of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, this area, all in here is what we're talking about. And that is the area that was given to them as a result of these conquests. And yet the men, the soldiers, had to cross over and help the other tribes. And so if you look down here at the bottom, this is the area of Jericho. And that's going to play an important role, keeping in mind where Jericho is in relationship to this other area shortly as we get into that. And so after the conquest of the Transjordanian region, the Israelites came down. We talked about Moses going up on Mount Nebo last class. And so they're here just across the river from Jericho and are ready to go in. And that leads us to chapter 2, which is where we want to spend most of our time tonight, talking about Rahab and the spies, which sounds like a good band name. But Rahab and the spies, very well-known story. And so we see in chapter 2, verse 1, the story kind of begin to unfold. And what I want to do is kind of look through this story, and then as we get to the end of it, we'll make some lessons and some applications after we kind of go through the factual part of this. And so Joshua the son of Nun, verse 1, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." Well, Joshua is sort of doing his due diligence here, isn't he? We talked a little bit about the overview of Joshua and how, God gave them the land, but there were still some things that they had to do. And so Joshua is doing his due diligence. At this point, he doesn't know, God has not told him how Jericho is going to fall or anything else in the land. And so Joshua, what had he done 40 years before? He had gone over as a spy, right? And so, naturally when they come up to the land again, what's he thinking? Well, let's send some spies over. But it's interesting, where it says in verse 1, he sent 2 men secretly as spies. What had happened the last time? That hadn't gone very well, had it? It kind of backfired on him. And so it seems like maybe what he did was, rather than select a group from every tribe and kind of make a public display of sending these spies over, it seems like he was a little more secretive this time, and didn't want to repeat what had happened 40 years before. And so he sent these 2 men over, and he gave them a mission. And it says, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." And so the spies went over to view the land, especially Jericho, except where did they end up? They ended up at the house of the local prostitute, didn't they? It says there in verse 1, "And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there." Now, whether this was the beginning of their foray into the land of Canaan, whether this was after they had already searched them out, whatever the case was, once they came into Jericho, it seems like things kind of fell apart for them fairly quickly. Because how quickly were they found out? Almost, yeah, immediately. They came in, and that same day, what happened? They came looking for him. And so the king of the city, the chief of Jericho, whatever your version might say, knew about it and went and came looking for him. And so it's interesting, thinking about how all this kind of played out as we go through the story. Now, there might be very good reasons why they ended up at Rahab's house. There are some people that have kind of tried to maybe rehabilitate Rahab and say, well, she was an innkeeper, and that might be true, but if she probably wasn't running the local Hampton Inn. The Bible refers to her multiple times as a prostitute and a harlot. And I think it's safe to base our view of that on that, and I think it adds to the story, as we'll see later. She may have been a cult prostitute in the pagan temple, but whatever the case was, the Bible I think clearly says she was a woman that would have been looked down upon even in that society. But the spies may have ended up there trying to go unnoticed because of the number of people that might have been in and out of that house, whether it was an inn or not. There were obviously would have been people going in and out. But when we look at Rahab, we see a woman who was sort of on the fringe of society, regardless of whether you look at her as a prostitute or an innkeeper or whatever. There were 2 or 3 things about her that kind of show that she would have been looked down upon in that society. Later on, we'll see that when she talks about her saving her family, she does not mention a husband. She talks about her father and her mother and her brothers and sisters. She does not have apparently does not have a husband. Even where she lived, as we will see later on in the story, she lives in the wall, or possibly as depending on what interpretation you view of how the walls were constructed between the two walls. And we'll talk about the walls of Jericho in a couple of weeks, but in a little more detail. But perhaps there was a first wall and then sort of a revetment area and then a second wall, and her house would have been in that first area. And so you can kind of look at that in one of two ways. You know, that it might be an easy way to look at it and say, well, that, you know, she had a nice house. It was right up against the wall. Well, maybe, but she also would have been the first one to get overrun when an enemy came, wouldn't she? She was the people who would have been in that wall would have been, as we would say, the cannon fodder, and so that was not the ideal place to live, and so she was not one that was well thought of in society. But when we look at the way she interacted with the spies, I think we see three main things. And the first, we see her protection. We see the protection that she gave to them. I want to show a picture of, this is a view from Jericho that looks out east towards the Jordan River. And I show you this picture to kind of set the stage for sort of the position that Rahab and the other residents of Jericho were in. Because when you look out from Jericho towards the Jordan River, you can see forever. And, you know, those mountains over there up at the top, if you remember from last week, those would have been the area where Moses was taken to view the land. And so you've got this valley between these two mountains. Well, put yourself in Jericho. Every night, you look out towards that river. What do you see? You see Israelites. You see campfires, don't you? As far as the eye can see. You know, hundreds of thousands of Israelites camped over there. I mean, you can just, the anxiety in that city, the anxiety that Rahab would have felt. You know, every night, looking out over there and seeing that huge number of people and realizing, you know what, sooner or later, where are they going to come? They're going to come here. You've got the river in between. But sooner or later, they're going to cross over. And so that's sort of where we see Rahab and the other people in Jericho. And so with that as a backdrop then, as the king's officers come to Rahab and says, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all of the land. But the woman had taken the two men. Rahab had taken the two men and hidden them. And she said, true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. If you watch many Westerns, the posse pulls up and they say, you know, which way did they go? You know, that way. Well, that's sort of how she did. They went that way. Except, where were they? They were up on the roof, weren't they? She had hid them and diverted the people that were looking at them. And so, as we think about the protection that Rahab had offered them, it's interesting how quickly she chose the spies over her own people. You know, the spies came to her, and this was the same day. The king sent officers and said, you know, where are they? And immediately, seemingly, she had made that decision to choose the spies over her people. She had taken steps and she had hid the spies. She had put them up on the roof and the flax that was up there drying, probably to be spun into to thread and made into fabric at some point. And so she had taken them up there and hidden them. There's no indication that they asked her to do that, is there? She had just done it. She had kind of taken control of the situation and told them, look, you go up there and hide. And so not only that, but she lied to the officers of the king. And again, a lot of times we get kind of hung up on this, especially when we think about Rahab in the New Testament and the example of faith that she's shown to be in Hebrews and in James. And we say, well, this people will say, well, this shows that a lie can be excused. I don't think that's what this shows at all. I think if you look at this story, what you see is all of these people were imperfect. Certainly Rahab was, and I think that adds to the lessons that we can learn. And so Rahab not only chose the spies over her countrymen, she hid the spies, she lied to the officers of the king, and then she goes and tells the soldiers, says, look, when you leave here, you need to go to the mountains. You need to go and you need to hide there for three days. And so this is from Jericho looking the other direction. And so you see from Jericho looking west, and this would have been the mountains that she told them to go into to avoid those who were pursuing them, and taking steps, putting her own life on the line in order to save theirs. But beyond the protection that she offered them, because beyond the lie that she told that kind of put the people off their trail, I think we see the testimony that Rahab offered, and this is sort of the key part of this whole dialogue between Rahab and the spies. And so in verse 8, after she has sent the pursuers away, she goes back up to the men on the roof, and she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, verse 10, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. That's why we talked about that at the very beginning, because Rahab brings it up, because they were right across the river from her. She was very familiar, would have been very familiar with what happened. And so the testimony that Rahab gives in this, she says, I know the Lord has given you the land. That we think about that, we know the rest of the story, and so we understand that. But for her to be able to say that before any of this took place, I mean, how would you expect a resident of Jericho to react? Looking out over the valley and seeing all the campfires of the enemy. You would expect someone from Jericho to be ready to fight, to say, look, you can try to come and take this land, but you're going to have to fight for every inch of it. We're going to put up a fight, and look at these walls. We're well fortified. Bring it on. Let's see who wins. But yet she doesn't say that. She says, I know that the Lord has given you this land. She goes on to say, we have heard. We've heard what he's done. We heard about the Red Sea. Well, how long ago was the Red Sea? It's 40 years, wasn't it? That story had been circulated around. I mean, this was not recent history. This was an event 40 years in the past, and yet to Rahab and to the people there in Jericho, they were familiar with it. They knew what had happened in that. They had heard about it, even though it was hundreds of miles away. That story had come to them. And then she says, we know what you've done to Sihon and to Og, the kings that were just on the other side of the river. And as soon as we heard it, verse 11, our hearts melted. There was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. And so the testimony she gives is based on the evidence that she had seen, and what she, or not what she had seen, but what she knew and what she had heard. And she knew what was coming. And so because of that then, she makes a deal with them. And she says, now please, verse 12, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign, and that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And so she makes a deal with these spies, and seemingly she has known about that, and this has sort of been the plan that she has had in place from the very beginning of this whole incident. She saw this as her chance to save herself and to save her family. And so she proposes this deal to them. The spies agree. Basically, they have no choice. She's kind of maneuvered this whole situation to where she's kind of trapped them. They have to agree to this in order to get out of this situation alive. And so they say, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. And so she lets them down through a window in the wall, tells them to go back up into the hills and the mountains, not towards the fort as we saw in that picture just a few minutes ago. And so the final condition then of this deal that she makes with them says, hang the scarlet cord in the window. Behold, when we come into the land, verse 18, you shall tie the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And you shall gather into your house your father and your mother and your brother and all your father's household. And if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall all be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is in the house with you, his blood shall be on our head. And so they tell her, look, you've got to gather your people together, and you've got to keep them in this house. Mark the house with this scarlet cord. And so they leave. The spies hid in the hills for 3 days and then returned to Joshua. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Maybe not quite that long. We'll assume it's 10 minutes. But what are the lessons from this story? You know, what's the point for us? Well, we mentioned before that in Hebrews 11 and in James chapter 2, the faith of Rahab is mentioned. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, it says, by faith she did not perish. James chapter 2, verse 25 says she was justified by works because she received the messengers and sent them out a different way, or received the spies and sent them out a different way. How did Rahab get this faith? How do we get faith? Yeah, it's an easy question. Hebrews 10:17. Faith comes by what? Hearing. Faith comes by hearing. Well, what was the very first thing that Rahab said? It says, we've heard. We've heard what you've done. We've heard what your God has done. And she took that and used that to build this faith in her heart. Her faith came by hearing. She had heard about the Red Sea. She had heard about the kings, Sihon and Og. And her hearing produced faith, which is, what is faith? How does Hebrews 11 define faith? So then faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Well, had she seen that? She hadn't seen any of these wonderful works that God has done. She had heard about them. What does Jesus say to Thomas? That you've put your hands in the nail prints, but blessed are who? The ones who have heard, who haven't seen, and yet have heard. Well, that's Rahab. That's us. She hadn't seen the miracles, but she believed them. Her faith led her to conclusions. I know that the Lord is giving you this land. I know that Yahweh is the God of heaven and of earth. And so she had this faith that was convicting her of these things. And she had a faith that was made complete by her actions. That's the whole point of James. James his argument is Abraham had faith, but if he hadn't put it into action, it would have been dead. Faith without works is dead. Rahab, she could have said, yes, I believe all this stuff, but when the officers came, she could have said, hey, here are these spies. That wouldn't have done her any good. She put her faith into action. And so she's used as an example alongside Abraham. One commentator said, it's interesting that you've got Abraham, sort of this the father of the faithful, and someone that Israel would have looked up to as their father. And then on the flip side, you've got a Canaanite prostitute. And yet both of them have faith and have action and are accepted by God. And so we see that God can save anyone through their faith. Rahab also had to wait for salvation in a hostile place. Think about after the spies left. What would have happened to Rahab if the story had gotten out? Yeah, nothing good. Doubtless she would have been killed. And yet, she had to wait for several more days until they crossed the Jordan, which we'll talk about next week. Think about how she would have felt, looking out, and seeing the camp on the other side of the river, and knowing that that's where her salvation was, and yet I've got to stay in this hostile place and wait. Think about when the Israelites were walking around the wall, once a day for 6 days, and you think every day Rahab's sitting there looking out the window and going, here I am, come get me. I'm tired of worrying every time there's a knock on the door. I'm tired of every time I see a soldier in the streets thinking, okay, he's coming for me. Come get me. And yet she still had to wait for salvation to come to her. Rahab had to stay in the house, covered by the scarlet cord. When you look at verse 18, it says, behold, when you come into the land, you shall tie the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. What does that remind you of? Passover. What had they done to be passed? They had to put blood over the door. And it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion about exactly the nature of the scarlet cord. I mean, one way to look at it as well, there was a marker for the Israelites to know which window was hers. And if you're going to hang a cord in the window, you don't want it to be a brown cord that's going to blend in with the wall. So let's hang a red one or a scarlet one up there. And that could have a certain functionality to it, but I think as is the case with so much of Scripture, there's probably a little more to it than that. The word that's translated in verse 21, where it says, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window, this is the only place that it is translated cord. Everywhere else that is used in the Old Testament is translated as hope. And so basically, if you look at it from that standpoint, then the spies tell Rahab, look, you've got to exhibit some hope. Isn't that what it says? Show this cord, exhibit hope. She had to show this outward symbol that she had this hope of scarlet, as one author calls it, connecting this hope to the window of escape. And I think it's hard to miss a parallel between that and Exodus, where the blood was spread on the doorposts. And when the angel of death, the death messenger, whatever term you want to use, the destroyer came, what did the Israelites have to do? Could they go out and kind of watch? They had to stay in the house. Well, what did Rahab? Over and over again, the spies told her, look, stay in the house. Don't get out. Stay in the house, covered and underneath the scarlet, underneath this hope that you have. So she's about to have her own Passover. She's about to have her own Exodus. And the scarlet, the sign of blood, is a sign of hope for deliverance. And it kind of goes back to what she asked for back in verse 12. It says, give me a sure sign. She said, I want to know that I'm going to be saved. I want to know that salvation is coming. And so this scarlet cord, I think, gave her that hope and that sure sign that she was able to connect it to the place of deliverance, the window through which the spies escaped. And I want to think of one other thing before we leave. And that's just ask a question. Why were the spies sent? Have you ever thought about that? We said at the very beginning, Joshua sent them. Why? He's thinking about this from a military perspective, right? He wants to know, what are the defenses like? How can we breach the walls? Where are there valleys and hills that we can hide behind as we work our way around the city? We know why he sent the spies. Why did God allow the spies to be sent? Because what did God know? God knew what was happening. God knew how were the spies necessary? Did the spies come back with anything that Joshua didn't and tell him something that God didn't already know and hadn't already told him? Why did God allow Joshua, or not stop him, from sending these spies over into the land? It's an interesting question, and I think sometimes we kind of look at that, and maybe we say, well, what this story is. This story is God's providence, showing that these spies went over, they got in trouble, and of all the places in Jericho they could go, they went to the one place that was able to help them. And so the providence of God worked out so that who could be saved? The spies. Maybe we're missing something. Maybe what the story is, when you look at it from God's perspective, maybe the story is God looking and saying, you know what? I've got a person in that city. She's not much the way the world looks at her. She's on the fringe. She's about as low on the social ladder as you can get. But you know what? She has faith. And I'm going to send people there, and I'm going to get her out. And I'm going to save her. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. It's not unheard of. When Jesus spoke to the woman in John 4, the woman at the well at Sychar, the Bible says in John 4, it says he had to go through Samaria. Well, did he have to go through Samaria? He didn't. Jews went from north to south all the time without going through Samaria. Why did he go through Samaria? I think he went through Samaria because he needed to see that woman, because she needed to see him. And I think that, when we look at Christ's life and we see the people that he associated with, and the people that he ate with, and all the Pharisees said, well, he eats with sinners. Don't you know that woman's a sinful woman? Basically, don't you know that that woman's a prostitute? Why are you letting her be near you? You can't have anything to do with people like that. Well, maybe that didn't start with Jesus. Maybe that started way back here in the Old Testament, where God saw this woman who had heard about his works and had heard about his great deeds, and it had built faith in her. And it had built faith so much so that she was willing to take action, to do whatever she could to save her life and to save her family's life. Maybe the story of Rahab is the story of an outcast that is without hope. And yet God saw her. And God said, you know what? I'm going to go. I'm going to send people, and I'm going to save her through her faith. And maybe that's the lesson that we need. That no matter what we've done, no matter how far we've run from God, no matter how far on or down on the ladder we feel that we are, whatever the case may be, you know, the lesson of Rahab is God saying, you know what? I can take care of that. I can do away with that. I can graft you into my family, just like he did Rahab. And maybe that's the lesson that we need to take away from this. All right, next week we'll cross the Jordan and continue in chapter 3. I appreciate you being here and your attention. Thank you.